I know that that's something that just seems to work. That doesn't work for everybody. Some people write an absolute mess, but I find it quite hard. So that's always been a sort of habit.
I don't have a method. All I need is time. And usually, because I have to write such a lot of things, admin papers, academic papers, teaching notes. So sometimes I try to persuade myself, I will just write this poem, after that I will get on to the other kinds of writing. So it's like taking a break. So writing a poem is like taking a break.
You know, for me, because I come from a background as a newspaper man, I don't write. I report, which is a bit different. So if I have to deliver a book or a short story or a kid's book or a detective story, I go out, I walk, and I watch things in my head. And I think, you know, we all have a cinema in our heads. And for me, it's very like a real cinema. It's a screen, and I see people, and I watch the story on that screen, and then I rewind, and then I watch the story again, and I move people around, and I rewind, and then I change the dialogue, and I just watch that scene over and over and over again, and I keep adjusting it. And you can see me, if you come to Chim Sa Choi, I'm quite famous there, just walking around and around Chim Sa Choi, just looking completely blank. And I often walk into people and things because I'm watching the screen in my head, and it works well because you can revise easily on that screen, much more easily than you can on paper. So once the whole scene is created, all the characters, all the dialogue, then I rush back and just report on it. And then I'm writing. I'm not making up stuff. I'm writing what I've seen happen. So there's a freedom in my imagination if I use that method. And I don't know, I mean, different writers have different methods, but for me that's the fastest way of getting a chapter done. And you know, I write books very fast, so that way I can actually get books finished before deadline.
It's quite interesting about, you know, the best thing that ever happened to me is that the cell phone was invented. And you can walk around talking to yourself now, and people think you're talking on the phone. I can never talk on my cell phone with one of those, you know, listening devices. I just can't, you know. In fact, I hate answering my phone, but I pretend that I am, because all my life I hold these imaginary conversations. And the older I get, you know, it's true what they say about age. I start talking aloud, and I start thinking, okay, now I am really going crazy. Before that, I just kind of knew I was, but I could pretend I wasn't. But these conversations that I have over and over again with these imagined or real people, well, it might start with a real person in my head, the conversation that I wanted to have but didn't have, for example, and then it turns into the imagined person, and it becomes the character. And pretty soon, I've got this whole story mapped out, the whole scene mapped out, and then I can write it. I do find walking around Tsim Sha Tsui is very good for that. I grew up in Tsim Sha Tsui, so I do walk around. I don't know what your excuse is. My excuse is I grew up there, so I go back there and just talk to my past, you know, and talk to the ghosts.
When you don't have a journalistic deadline, how do you actually know when a piece is finished?
Usually something is finished when it has to be finished. I think the students here can empathize with that.
You know, all art is a compromise between time and quality. Because if you have 1,000 years, you can keep improving and improving and improving. But if you take 1,000 years, it's, you know, all your readers will be dead. You'll be dead. So there's always a compromise between time and the quality of the art. But this is the cruel thing. When the reader reads the book, or the publisher or the agent reads the book, they never consider this. A book that takes 10 years to write, or a book that takes 10 weeks to write, will be treated exactly the same. So you have to give yourself a deadline. You have to choose between quality and quantity. I mean, a saying that helps me is I will always try to write better than all the people who can write faster than me, but I will always try to write faster than all the people who write better than me. By holding that thought in my head, you know, I get the right balance of quality and time, which is really important, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I do agree about the compromise, because one of the ways I finally can stop writing a piece is I'm so sick of it that I just have to end it. You know, that's the thing about book length work, especially. You work on it for say a few years, and you live with these characters until you can't stand listening to them anymore. You know, it's like, you go play one more time, I'm not writing about you. And so that's actually incentive to stop the book. But one of the things I do so that it doesn't, so that I can move faster is like I write short pieces, I write short stories, I write essays, and these have a shorter beginning, middle, and end. And that's, I find, quite useful. And I sometimes, like, especially if I'm working on a novel, I want to work out a problem about one character. So I write a short story dealing with that issue, or that emotion, for example, and I just do it, and that's, okay, I solved that problem. It's like, I do little pieces of it at a time, then I can go back to the novel and do it for real, you know? And my last collection of short stories, it took me 10 years to get that book together, but I realized that I was doing it while writing 2 other novels. And I can trace each of those stories what I was trying to figure out in the novels I was working on. So it's kind of interesting. It's sort of a method that kind of works. I'm still doing it now. I just did it recently. I just wrote a new short story to solve a problem in a novella I'm working on.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a question, and like what Agnes said too. I mean, so many, I think like a lot of the students also, we're writing in so many different genres, whether it's academic writing, whether it's assignment, whether it's, some students are probably creative writers as well, and so on. So it's quite demanding. Cognitively, it's very demanding, isn't it? I also wonder, and probably a lot of people wonder, how much editing and revising you do. I mean, we're always on the students about this, you know, you need to spend more time revising, you need to polish your work, you need to... How much time do creative writers, well, at least for you, how much time typically do you spend on editing and revising?
It's all about the editing, it's all about revising. Great books are not written, they're rewritten and rewritten and rewritten. The average, you know, I mean, if you think of Pixar movies, Pixar movies get great reviews. Why? They are rewritten 20 times. Disney movies also. Great books are always rewritten and rewritten and rewritten many times. The first Harry Potter book was rewritten again and again for 5 years. That's why it's a good book. The last Harry Potter books, the last few, were just written once. And, you know, I shouldn't really say this, but they're really bad books. That's why they're bad books, because we're too scared to tell her, this is a terrible book, you should change it. You know, she was too famous then. And so she never rewrote them. And so that's why they're so bad, you know. And I'm a Harry Potter fan, so we've got to be truthful about these things. So rewriting is what it's all about.
It varies. I mean, any long piece I write, any book-length work I write goes through multiple versions. I think my last novel that I finished had something like 11 different versions, and some of them were drastically different from each other. And I just think that that's the process for a book. But with shorter pieces, sometimes, with essays especially, I find, sometimes I can be thinking about the essay for a very long time. And when I finally go and sit down to write it, it comes out all in a flash, and it requires editing. It still requires revision, but it doesn't require as much, because it seems to have kind of written itself in my head. But the length of it does make a difference, because I don't think I could do it with any long work. It would be impossible, you know, just to structure and everything, and the characters come to life and then they die, and you know, you kill a character and you start all over again. Constantly killing characters. This is my problem. So.
For me, it varies. It depends on the piece. Some pieces do not need as much editing, and some pieces require a lot of editing. And it also depends on the material, I think. For some subjects, I may actually do some research before actually writing what I want to write. So it varies a lot. Thank you.
You know, what's sat next to? Have you heard of Thomas Keneally? He's a famous author. You know the movie Schindler's List? Remember that? You know, he's a famous author, and he won the Booker Prize. And anyway, I was sitting in a dinner with his wife, and his wife told me that he wrote the draft, and then he has horrible writing. No one can read it except her. So she typed it out on an old-fashioned typewriter, every word of it. And then he read it and changed it, and then she typed it out again. And she typed out the whole book 9 times. And she said every time she typed it out, she fixed it and made changes. And when he was getting the prize, she said, actually, I should be getting that prize. Because she was the one who was rewriting it, not him. You know. So, as often the case, the woman behind was the man.
Yes, we know that's true. Okay, well, we are at 5:15, and we have so many other questions, but it's okay. Maybe we can open it to the audience and see if students or anybody in the audience would like to ask a question.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I was just wondering, most of you have been, well, from what I'm hearing, you're writing about an experience. And apart from the own experience and observation you mentioned, is there any other research that you do before you write your book or your...
I do an awful lot of research for my novels, and also for the nonfiction essays. I wrote a collection of essays about Hong Kong, and part of it, of course, was observation, but there was also historical research. Because I decided I wanted to write a history of Hong Kong, but I'm not a historian, so I wanted it to be an unusual history of Hong Kong. So I decided I was going to interview Hong Kong and let Hong Kong speak. But in order to be able to do that, first I read like 4 books of history of Hong Kong by real historians, so I would get the facts right. Also, for my last novel, actually 2 novels ago, I did a lot of history research on the flying tigers, you know, the pilots in China, the American pilots in China, because I had a character who had been a flying tigers, and I started reading and doing an awful lot of research, and all I want sometimes is just a tiny little bit out of that. But you need to know a lot of information. As is true in academic research, you research a lot more than you need to pull out the salient points that you need. And I find that because when I met the flying tigers, one of the last was a guy in Guangzhou, and talked to him too. So I mean, you know, that kind of research I do, and I've done various other forms as well. I interviewed a bunch of photographers because I had a photographer character. So, you know, I mean, even though this is fiction, I'm not doing it as a journalist per se, you have to know your facts because I was trying to write realistic fiction, so I wanted to be able to render the world realistic.
The research can be really hard. I wrote a book once, a fiction book, in which the bodyguard of the President of the US has a romance with the bodyguard of the President of China. And so I thought, okay, research these guys. And researching the bodyguards of the President of China was really hard. Every time I would ask questions, people would say, why do you want to know this? And eventually I flew up to Beijing and I was following them around. I just wanted basic details like what colour is their uniform, what colour buttons do they have. And I was writing down a big blue uniform, gold buttons, 6 gold buttons. I was writing this down, you know, and they turned around and they caught me. And I just had to run for it. You know, it was so, there was no information available anywhere in any language. I spoke to experts and it was also scary. Then I had to research the US Secret Service. So just, you know, on Google, there's that thing that says, I feel lucky. Or I press, US Secret Service, and press, I feel lucky. It took me straight to ussecretservice.com. And it just tells you everything you want to know. And then I went to the, there were some officials visiting Hong Kong. And do you know they have it written on the side of their car, US Secret Service? It's on the car, it's actually on the car. And so I just went up to one of these guys and said, so you're with the US Secret Service? And he said, yeah, do you want my card? And he gives me a card and it says, you know, Jake Bradley, US Secret Service. You know, so I just thought, wow, it's so different, US and China. That just made my book more valuable because I can use all this material. So research is really important, but yeah, it can be hard to get.
I think poetry is a little bit different. It depends on whether you're trying to speak with your voice or you're trying to speak with somebody else's voice. There is a poet that I interviewed in Singapore. He wrote a poem about a serial killer. So obviously he didn't go around killing people for it, but I guess he had to read up on serial killing. And there was another poem he wrote on domestic violence. So I think he had to be familiar with those. But coming back to our own experience, one of the poems that I just read, like Rendezvous with glowworms, for that one I actually read up on the life cycle of glowworms. So I actually knew that how many hours do they really make, how many babies do they really produce. So I wanted, like Sushi and Nury, I wanted to get my facts straight maybe because I'm a teacher, so I want to be that anything that I write, you know, the facts must be correct, even though I don't base it entirely on facts. And in fact, sometimes I will change the facts to protect the people that I'm writing